Yeah, and boundaries are more like gates. So we want to like keep in the good but let out the bad, but we also need to be willing to have those conversations. And the more we practice, the more confident we are at setting boundaries and knowing that we can speak up and advocate even if it feels uncomfortable, but knowing that that's our truth and people need to hear that.
Welcome back again to another episode of the Confident Mompreneur podcast, where we talk to real women from around the globe about real life difficulties and triumphs in momhood, business, relationships, health, and more. I'm your host, Kyrie, ready to give you real actionable advice to help you become the best, most confident version of you in all areas of your life. Let's get into it. Welcome on today, Jan and Jillian. I'm so excited to have you guys both here. I was just saying before we hopped on, I've never had two guests on at the same time, so I'm so excited.
Thanks for having us. We're excited to be here.
So, for those who don't know you guys, do you want to start out by introducing yourselves and a little bit about who you guys are, what you do, all of those good things?
Sure. We kind of have the same background. We both have our master's in family psychology, and we also certified mediators and conflict resolution specialist. So we specialize in interpersonal dynamics and also the relationship with ourselves in terms of setting healthy boundaries and elevating our relationships so we can have a much more fulfilling lifestyle across the board.
That is so cool. So you guys are twins for those people who aren't watching the video version of this. You guys are twins. So what was it like growing up, going to school together, doing all of those things together at the same time?
I think it's actually been really impactful being twins because we've always sort of considered if we were to make a decision about life or maybe we're going to make plans with friends, whatever it may be. A lot of times, or even in business, like we've always sort of considered how it could impact the other person, especially if it's going to impact their life. So I think that's something unique is we've always really consulted with each other or talked about what are we going to do or how are we going to resolve this problem. So I think that's been ingrained to us in a very early age. Having that mentality and also really respecting the other person and considering their input. So when we grew up in a really small town of 900 people and then moved to a metropolitan city of 3 million. So that was a huge culture shock where we learned then we need to really have stronger boundaries.
Yeah, we were a little bit green and a little too trusting of everybody because back where we grew up, we were used to being heard and understood or respected. And so when you get into a culture shock of a city of 3 million and you're dealing with people who have a little bit more of we personally encountered people with more of a me mindset, and that became very challenging to get our needs met or feel heard and understood in those dynamics.
That is so interesting. Yeah. I am from a small town in Wyoming, so I 100% get that like small town mindset.
Yeah.
And I don't think I would thrive very well in a big city, so I'm sure that was a very large change. Did you guys just choose to move there because of college, or what brought you guys there?
Yes, we relocated due to college. So, and then we just kind of stayed.
Fair enough. I love your guys' like mentality of when it comes to setting boundaries, and it's kind of cool that you guys have obviously lived that your entire lives basically by having that relationship between you two, and also navigating, like all of the outside relationships too. So you guys were co-authors of a book. What is that book and what is it generally about?
So we are the co-authors of Boundary Badass, which is a powerful method for elevating your value in relationships. So it's all about honing in on your authentic truth and personal alignment based on your value system, and then being able to set healthy boundaries with people in your life from a place of value versus emotion. So we have a value-based framework, which allows us to resolve conflict much quicker or find personal alignment in our relationships where we can grow and connect and find clarity and be able to resolve differences much quicker or just build our connections in general.
values are universally understood, but then if someone tries to set a boundary from a me mindset or based solely on their emotions, more than likely it's not going to go over well with the other person, because emotions are one-sided perspectives that can be challenging for the other person to understand where we might be coming from.
Mm. So when you're talking about setting it from a value-based standpoint, do you guys like have a framework of like how do we determine our values and how do we see how boundaries fit within those?
Yes. So our values are connected to our emotional needs. So usually we have people, when working with them, identify their 5 personal values and their provide professional values. And so sometimes they have overlap. For me personally, like I have communication, integrity, and time across, both my personal and professional. So it's very easy for me to honor those on a day-to-day basis. And so if someone was to not communicate with me or maybe not respect my time, I'm going to feel that emotion, that sensation in my body that's saying someone's not respecting one of my values. And that's how I know I'm going to set a boundary using that value specifically, because that's the need I would like to have met.
Mm-hmm. I feel like it's hard for us sometimes to like recognize what our own values are and like why we're feeling the emotions that we are. Instead, we're just like allowing the emotions to kind of take us over a little bit in that. And so I love that you guys are like, okay, like take a step back from the emotion and like recognize where it's coming from, why you're feeling the way that you're feeling, instead of just like running into things, emotions forward, because I feel like that's so often where we kind of get ourselves in trouble.
Right. If we're not emotionally regulated, it can be very challenging to communicate what our needs are in a dynamic where our boundaries might be crossed. And so emotional regulation is a very powerful tool that we need to implement on a regular basis in order to feel regulated, so we can communicate in a way that's confident and also calm in order to really articulate what that need is within the dynamic.
Mm. I love that you use the words confident and calm because we're the confident mompreneur. And I think, you know, especially with boundary setting, it's like really scary and really difficult, especially if you've never really done it before. And it can be very intimidating. So to be able to, like, have this mindset and this framework to allow you to move forward confidently in something like that is super important.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think too, when we're using our values, it allows us to still be vulnerable, but without exposing ourselves too much vulnerability. So we might say, I feel undervalued when our relationship is not prioritized. I value quality time. How can we spend more time together to work on our relationship? And so it's coming across very constructive, because we're trying to promote growth and alignment, even though we're addressing the lack of time spent on that relationship. So we're bringing up the problem, but we're not attacking the other person. We're just talking about the behavior, but then we're positioning a resolution, a goal, and opening up the conversation to negotiate, and now what that looks like for both parties.
I love that term of negotiation. I feel like boundaries is something that has become more like spoken about as like social media and things have grown, but I think that it has been kind of somewhat twisted into a me mindset and like going in like, claws forward type of thing
Yeah.
instead of thinking about it as a mutual negotiation where you're trying to figure out a resolution where both parties are getting what they need from, that relationship.
Exactly. So if someone's trying to set an boundary from a me mindset, more than likely it's going to be delivered in an ultimatums type of way. So it's going to be conditional, such as, if you don't do X, Y, Z, then I'm going to basically, do X, Y, Z and leave this relationship, or I'm not going to talk to you or communicate. Can't have you in my life. It's a very black and white thinking, and it creates greater disconnect and breeds resentment within the connection. And we're not getting our needs met communicating that way.
Mm-hmm. So you guys have different chapters in the book for kind of like different areas that you're trying to set boundaries in. So for us, like a lot of these people are, you know, moms. So we've got kind of that family aspect. They're business owners. So we've got like the client business owner perspective. And they may also be just like working moms working in a regular 9 to 5 job. So for the family side of things, because I know, you know, for a lot of us, we hear about like, you know, parents being separated from their children's very often. I feel like that's becoming more and more normal. I definitely did that with my parents and have had to like step back and like be like, okay, well, actually, we just needed to kind of like set some boundaries here. How do we go about negotiating boundaries when it comes to family?
So when it comes to family, I think too, it's like, how can we find common ground? What is the behavior that feels triggering to us or feels disrespectful? And then asking them, when is a good time to talk? Because you would like to address something that's been on your mind, because you want both people to be able to have this conversation and receptive. I think a lot of times, as much as we want to set the boundary as soon as possible, which sort of goes into our method ASAP, like a lot of times whenever we do that, if the other person's not willing to hear us out and they're in this like defensive mode, they're not going to be receptive to the boundary either. So I think a lot of times asking when's a good time, but then
and that might be for extended family too. So you might have boundaries with extended family that they can't just show up to your house whenever they just like choose to and invade your immediate family dynamics. There also might be boundaries between the marital couple and then also with children as well, because children have their own voices and they develop their internal voice from infancy up to age 7 is where we're developing our prime belief system and how we're going to kind of operate in our own dynamics. And children also deserve to have a voice, and we even help parents negotiate boundaries with children, because children are actually very wise and they actually are able to know what their consequences might be if they are misbehaving. So, and that helps the child develop integrity within their own life.
I ask my son that all the time. I'm like, okay, well, you've seen that the choice that you've made was probably not a good one. What do you think your consequences should be? And he usually comes up with a few good options. And I'm like, okay.
They are pretty smart and they're able to really it helps them strengthen their own voice. It helps them critically think about, this behavior was not something that I should continue doing. This is my, repercussions and the integrity with myself in order to hold myself accountable. So we're creating really wise children, and they're able to make better decisions and line to their inner voice through setting their own boundaries.
Yeah, I think it's so, so important, especially like you said, in those like really transformative early years. I feel like a lot of parents think that they, you know, just aren't able to do that yet, but kids are so much smarter than we give them credit for, and they're constantly learning. And if we're providing a good example on our side, it rubs on off on them, you know.
Absolutely. Children learn from watching, not necessarily usually like listening. So yeah.
Yeah. So obviously you two are sisters. You guys have grown up together, done a ton together. Have you ever had to have those boundary setting conversations between the two of you?
Oh,
Yes, of course.
Yeah.
I mean, we have our sisterly
Really?
moments, of course, that's just like ingrained in us. We're usually on the same page when it comes to like business operations and
Correct.
everything that we're and how we operate as a business. But of course, we have our sisterly like moments that we have to say, okay, we might need like take a break today.
Yeah. But I think too, we're always establishing boundaries and what that looks like for us as we evolve as, individually in our own personal lives, but then also professionally whenever we are trying to, scale our businesses or we're trying to create new products or services. So I think, there's going to be constant shift when you're in that growth mindset and always evolving.
Yeah. I think that's super important to bring up too, is like that our boundaries can shift as things change, because we're all changing, we're all doing new things, and like those boundaries that maybe felt good 5 years ago are not going to be the same ones that we need now, and that's okay. Because I feel like so often when people think of boundaries, they think of it as like this hard stop wall, like this is where my boundary is, it's not moving and it never will.
Yeah, and boundaries are more like gates. So we want to like keep in the good but let out the bad, but we also need to be willing to have those conversations. And the more we practice, the more confident we are at setting boundaries and knowing that we can speak up and advocate even if it feels uncomfortable, but knowing that that's our truth and people need to hear that.
Mm. Yeah, that's so good. I think that kind of leads me into my question of like boundary setting when it comes to work. So, like, if you're working in a regular job and you're really struggling with, like, say, a supervisor or something like that, I feel like it can be really intimidating because they're kind of in this position of power above you to like negotiate or have these types of conversations with them. How would you guys approach that?
So we approach the disconnect within the relationship. And even though they might be in a superior role, we still have to own our own voice within whatever role we've been hired to do. And so even if they're asking you to say they're asking you to do somebody else's role versus hiring another employee to come on within the corporation. And so they're expecting their current staff to do extra roles outside of their identified position, then you address the disconnect in terms of what you were hired to do and what they're expecting you to do outside of that. And you could at that point in time either negotiate a raise in your pay, or you could figure out, okay, well, it seems like there's a disconnect in terms of extra responsibilities that have been assigned to me. However, and I value time management. How are we going to find a solution in order to make sure XYZ is done? Because you might not have the time to actually take on all these extra roles that they're assigning to you.
And it's important to use like it seems or it appears. We don't necessarily want to use I, so we want to depersonalize it. And then it actually allows the conversation to be more of a collaborative process as well, especially in a professional environment.
Yeah, I love that. I think like I think that's one of the hardest parts of like boundary setting and that like, we kind of mentality because I feel like a lot of those statements can come across very pointed when we use the I you statements. Like, I feel like this, so you need to change that type of thing. So, is there like a structure of like, here is how you set the boundary without using those types of terms?
So if it's a personal boundary, such as with a romantic partner or maybe a close friend, somebody that you have more of the intimate relationship with, you're close with on a personal level, then you can use I feel dismissed when my perceptions are shut down or ignored. So you're letting them know I feel a certain way, and then when you experience a certain behavior, but you're not pointing the finger at them. So you wouldn't say like, I feel dismissed when you ignore me, because then they're going to take that as an attack. But we say, I feel dismissed when I'm not receiving communication or when I'm being ignored. So you're owning what it is that you feel in that moment. But if it's from a more of a professional relationship or with somebody you don't have a close connection with, then you would address it from it seems, or it appears, or I think we might be on different pages here when it comes to XYZ. So you're approaching the big picture disconnect within the relationship.
So yeah, what she's mentioning is the first sentence, and then we would say what we value, like I value time management or I value mutual respect. Then how can we, and then you would state the goal that you hope to achieve in that relationship dynamic. So because you always want to end on a question that opens up the door for conversation, and that's how the negotiation process establishes, because you're making a request of how are we going to fix this. You want their input of how we're going to resolve this together, because when you get them to tell you what it is that they want to happen, that gives you
Insight in terms of how you're going to create a mutually agreeable common ground resolution or agreement within that boundary.
So in negotiations, a lot of times we want the other person to speak first, because that gives us more information of how to position our end goal or alignment or mutual agreement that we hope to achieve.
I love positioning it as a question to kind of get that back and forth kind of system going. Because again, like it's a negotiation, not just a attack on one front. So I love
Right.
because if someone attacks or if someone feels attacked, like you must stop doing this or else I'm going to do this, that's going to come across as like a threat. And more than likely that person's going to shut down and they're not going to do what it is that you're telling them to do because it's a demand. And so more than likely that just breeds, like I said, greater disconnect.
Yeah, resentment, all of
Mhm.
that. You brought up like system that you guys use in your book. What was the name of it?
So it's the initials ASAP is what we use.
ASAP.
So first you want to assess by asking an open-ended question. Can you help me understand how come you're not returning my phone calls? Or can you help me understand how come I haven't received a response to the email I sent on XYZ? So you're first trying to explore like where the disconnect is. And then the F is you set the boundary using the 3-sentence structure. And then the next A is you come up with agree upon a mutual plan that's going to work for the relationship in that negotiation process. And then P, proceed forward with accountability and honor that boundary that's been agreed upon for the relationship.
That's good. I love that. ASAP, that's a great one. So what happens if you are going through that whole process and you feel like the other person, even if you approach it in kind of this open negotiating way, is not willing to budge on their side of things? How do you move forward with that?
So when you have someone that might be, let's say, high conflict or might come across as very avoidant, combative, in those moments you might say, it doesn't seem like this is a good time to talk. When is a better time for us to talk about this? And try to get a new time and date of when you can bring up this conversation again. Because if someone isn't receptive or they're not willing to communicate, it doesn't do any service for that relationship or the connection. So getting them to come up with a new time would be the next step. And then if they say, well, I just don't want to have this conversation at all, then that's when you can say, okay, well, how are we going to fix this? Because it's impacting our work productivity or impacting the relationship.
When do you know when it's time to step away from like a relationship and set that kind of harder boundary where you're like, okay, I can't do this anymore?
Yeah, so if you're dealing with somebody who has a little bit more of toxicity in terms of their behavioral responses or reactions to trying to negotiate a boundary, then at some point in time, if you realize that there's not going to be any mutual respect within that relationship, then you have to redefine it to protect your own mental and emotional peace. So
I think that's what it all comes down to, is like protecting our own mental and emotional like state of mind through everything. Because I feel like when we feel like a doormat for people, that we're just letting them run over us, we're always feeling disrespected, we're not getting those needs met, like it's really hard to thrive and feel confident in those types of environments.
Absolutely, because people will just like zap our energy or take advantage of us, like you said, or maybe they try to um request services or products outside of the service agreement or client. So, we want to be in charge of our own life and be able to feel like we are powerful and we do have a voice. And it is important to be able to advocate and speak up in a way, but we can't control how other people respond. But when we speak our truth, that allows us to stay in our personal power so we don't breed toxicity in our own life or negativity.
Mm, I love that. That was such a powerful statement. That was so good. Um, so we're also a lot of like business owners on here, and I feel like one of the hardest relationships to kind of work on boundary setting in is like a client business owner relationship, because we always hear that term, the client's always right. Right? And so we just go with everything that the client says, even if it doesn't feel good to us, if it doesn't align with like our business or our values. How can we go about like saying, hey, no, this actually doesn't work for me. Like, you're not working with me. This doesn't align with my business values, all of those things.
that's kind of how we got started in terms of finding our actual boundary method was running our first business and the entrepreneurial endeavor. So we'd have clients who would try to push outside of our contractual agreements. And so that's where we really honed in on using values in order to negotiate the resolution and find the common ground to not hinder that client relationship, but also but still honor our boundaries or our contract within our business itself. And so we would try to find solutions that way. And a lot of times it's validating the client in terms of hearing what they're saying. Doesn't mean you agree, but validation is like, I hear what you're saying. But this is what we have previously agreed to in terms of our contracted hours or in terms of our agreement. If you'd like to add that service on, I'm more than happy to add this to our agreement, but then this would be the extended cost on that, or it depends on whether it's a service agreement or a product deal in terms of what it is that you do for work or whatever in terms of your business. But this is how we developed like I said, our boundary method was negotiating in business relationships.
I think too, while we might say the client's always right, at the same time, it is a working agreement and it is mutually beneficial to both parties. And so while we want to hear the client out, we also need to understand that the clients can't run our business. We need to run our business. And so we need to make sure we're not fearful to speak up and know where the company policies lie or the company values, and make sure that we're also finding a way to work better together with our clients, knowing that it's not like they're always right, but we honor and hear what they say, and let's find a way that we can resolve this together.
Yeah, I think as entrepreneurs, it's going to be very hard to find that work-life balance. And so if you don't have boundaries, like she said, your business could run you to the ground. And so it's really important that we have like business hours that we're operating within. We're operating within our business policies that we've created. Even these business policies, even if you're like a one-woman show, even these business policies aren't going out necessarily, at least you have your own mental business policies that you're operating by in order to just make sure that you can still manage every aspect of your own personal life outside of work.
Yeah. That brought up some thoughts for me on just like how I've had to learn to set boundaries with myself. When it comes to my business stuff, because, I am a one-woman show and I'm a mom and I work another full-time job and all of these things. So it's easy to kind of let those things take over my life if I don't put firm boundaries in place for myself. And so I think, like you said, like having that value-based system where you're like, okay, what is actually important to me? Well, for me, it's like time spent with my son, time spent with my partner, time spent adventuring are really important to me. And I can't do those things if I'm constantly buried in work and never taking any breaks. So, when can I take breaks? How can I like adjust my systems to fulfill that need for me?
Right. So
Yeah.
based on your value of time, you would divvy up your day in regards to the time you're dedicating to certain aspects of your life that you value. And so that's how you would create alignment to your value system based on the value of time and truth. It's our actions that create the alignment on a daily basis.
I think too, we're always putting professional appointments on our calendar, but we always put personal appointments on our calendar too. So, we hit the gym in the morning because that's like our personal time for ourselves. So we really try to fulfill our own cup and do our self-care, our self-love before we actually serve other people or engage with others in our, personal and professional lives. So I think having those personal appointments helps honor that time with yourself, which allows you then to extend your time to other areas of your life.
And it might be silly to some that you might say like, oh, I have playtime with my son at like 4 p.m. or I have dinner at 5 or I have this, with my partner at this time. But really all it does is one, we have to do that. We have to block off our calendars. Otherwise appointments are coming in on top of that. But when you have multiple calendars going through, but yeah, it really helps us create that lifestyle that we're looking for and the balance that we need.
Yeah. And so I just did something interesting the other day. I decided I was going to take a month and a half off during the summer just to
Mhm.
travel and be with my family and like just have that summertime. And so I posted, on my stories and was like, "Hey, just so you all know, I am taking a month and a half off. I will not be doing these things. So I have like limited availability for X, Y, and Z. Here are the spots, fill them." And that sense of like scarcity actually helped like bring in more people. I was like, cool, this is great. And I'll get like a month and a half off and it'll be great then too.
Yeah.
Right. And we like you learn that also that I mean taking that time for yourself is so vital to like running your business. Like
Mhm.
I'm a self-proclaimed workaholic, I'll admit it. But at the same time, I know I have to like do my like self-care on a day-to-day basis in order to make sure that I can be the best at what I am doing.
But I think too, everyone, you're listening to your body and your mind, and you're saying, like, I need this mental break. I need to be able to just like carve out this quality time with the people closest to me. Like she said, sometimes I'll live and work and I'll travel and work at the same time, but I also create a lifestyle that way because so I could do that kind of work-life balance. And so I think everyone has their own values, their own limits, their own mind, their own goals. And so that's why it's really important for everyone to identify what works for them because the, your lifestyle, my lifestyle, they're all going to be different. And so there's no right or wrong, but really figuring out what works for you is so critical and important because you have to live it and you have to own it.
Yeah. I think that's so important. And I found that when you live in alignment with like yourself and your own values and things, it becomes like this magnetic energy that brings in the other people that like feel like that too and recognize that and appreciate it in you.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Like, because you just glow from the inside out, and people see that aura, that confidence, that charisma. And I think, that draws in new energy and opportunities.
Yeah, absolutely. So, as you guys have been like, you went through college and then you've built your own businesses together. You guys have wrote this book. What are some of the most impactful like moments where you had to like set one of these boundaries and what did that look like going forward after that conversation?
A boundary what between the both of us or
Each individually would be fine. You can just
okay.
have a story.
Um Well, I'll say this in terms of lifestyle balance, I definitely have to set boundaries in regards to that every single day being an entrepreneur. So I make time for work, but I also make time for myself. And when it came to us like writing the book, like we only wrote it on the weekends because we run our businesses full time during the week. And there's not really time to, you have to be in a clear mindset and away from I had to be like detached from everything else to really like write. And so I had to set out every like weekend for the last couple, years to really get the book done and stay focused. So it's all about for me, those are my like personal boundaries that I have to set in order to achieve the goals or the bigger vision that I have that I'm working towards. Because it's our daily habits that help us achieve the bigger goal at the end of the day.
And I think now that this book is completed, I'm taking back Sundays as my self-care self-love day. Like I need a break than just rest. Like I'm okay doing a little bit on Saturday mornings and stuff the first part of the day, but Sundays it's like okay, no more. Like I need that mental day of like just peace for myself. So I think, you know, you recognize, where you do need to create that time. And there's nothing wrong with resting or just in having going on an adventure or whatever it is you want to do with your Sunday. But I think for me, our family time, I think it's just a matter of knowing that like we don't have to always be doing something every single day to be successful, that we do need those breaks too. The mental break is like so important.
I love that. I love the way that you said that. We don't have to be doing something at every point of the day to still be successful and still be like working towards our goals. And I feel like so often, when we're trying to handle everything all at the same time, it's easy to kind of get caught up in that minutia of things that we forget about the big picture. So I love that you guys are so like thoughtful in what are our big values? What are our big goals? And like, what are the actionable steps that we can take today in these relationships that surround us to really move us to that next level?
Yeah. And like I said, it's a process. It's like things don't change overnight. So I think too, when you first start setting boundaries with yourself or other people, you're gonna start to see some shifts. Some things may be a little uncomfortable or not be what you expected. But I think the biggest thing is like keep trying and keep working at it, because it will come full circle to the point you feel more at inner peace and this happiness and this joy, and you feel powerful, you know?
Yeah, it's have patience with yourself in this like self, discovery process and really like aligning to your values. I mean, everything in the book, like the first 9 chapters are all self-development. We eat and breathe every single thing that we write about in terms of our own lifestyle in order to have a sense of purpose, a sense of inner peace, and a sense of honoring our like value in terms of who we are. So yeah.
I love that so much. So, any final tips, tricks, tools, anything like that for the other women out there that are like really trying to do it all, trying to make everybody happy all at the same time, but also stay within, alignment of who they are and what they're going after?
So if they're trying to make everyone else happy, you're kind of going at it in a backwards approach. So really you need to focus on who you are, but also operating when you operate in your authentic truth, you're more than likely going to create mutual respect in all of your relationships. So that'll come natural that other people respect you based on how you command your own respect in your own life. And so but you'll also be able to negotiate and meet the needs of others within your relationships as well.
I think too, I hear a lot of times people when they first start setting boundaries, like, gosh, like, they have a lot of shame or guilt. Like, how come I didn't know this before? How come, no one ever taught me this? And it's not taught in the home, it's not taught in schools. And I think, be grateful that the opportunity is presenting for you now to start learning something to improve and feel empowered in that, knowing that like everyone goes through this at some point. It's just a matter of when that they go through this. And so, um, the opportunity is here now. And so just live it, breathe it, and just know like, okay, this is what's calling for me. This is what's showing up in my life. And this is what the action I need to take today, and start learning to set boundaries, because it will change your life, and it will allow you to feel that inner peace and feel more at ease in your conversations. And so there's no shame in it of when you start, and you can start at any point in time.
Just take it one baby step at a time. And then it'll eventually just become so innate with you in terms of how you operate that it becomes like an automatic new habit. But it does take time. Yeah.
Yeah, it definitely does. As somebody who's like kind of been in this self-development journey for a while and like talked about boundaries a lot, it's definitely something that like the people pleaser in me was very shameful about at first and like
Mhm.
very scared of. But as I've like worked on it and it's become more natural, like you said, it's just a daily part of my life now, and it feels it is not like that terrifying thing that it once was,
Mhm.
because I've just done the hard thing and worked on it, so
Well, I think too, you have to choose your hard. So your hard is like learn a new skill, or your heart is keep dealing with people who aren't respecting you or kind of like walking all over you. So like, but I would say once you choose your heart, it gets easier along the way. So it's like a matter of when you choose to overcome that or work through it or show up as your best self.
Yeah, because often if we choose the easy way out in that moment, which might be to ignore it or shove it on the rug or like make sure we're appeasing the other person and giving them what they want, at the end, we're suppressing our own needs. And eventually that's going to erupt into a volcano at some point in time.
mm, yeah, so true, so true. It's so funny that we are having this conversation this morning because I literally just had to set a boundary with a friend of mine this morning because she she has, kind of had a hard life and never learned these skills, and I can understand and appreciate that, but I also feel like she hasn't like attempted to learn them either and just wants me to solve the problems for her. And sometimes it can feel like an emotional drain off of me when I'm constantly like in that state. And so this morning I just had to say, you know, like emotionally, I can't do that for you today. I really hope you find somebody else that can, you know, really help you work through this, but today that can't be me. So I love that we got to have this conversation today.
Yeah, of course. Emotional boundaries are definitely in our book as well. And so you might say, like, I'm really sorry you're going through this right now. I just don't have the emotional capacity to really be there and support you. How about you come up with a couple solutions and then you can bring them up to me like tomorrow or the next day, and I can help you decide which solution is best for you. So then you're putting it back on her to kind of do the work and solve her own problem, which she would gain more from that rather than dumping it onto you as a friend to solve it for her.
Ooh, that's a good way to reframe it. I like that a lot. I'll have to use that.
Yeah, that's like discovery questions, not even just boundaries, but discovery questions, which are open-ended questions, which is the first step. You can use them to create clarity, connection, but also help people indirectly
solve
the
the
problem
problem.
or help hold them accountable for their own life. Because like we can go to all these people for our friends, family, professionals for help, but if we can't help ourselves, then how can other people really help us or serve us if we're not willing to do a little bit of our own work?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so true. I think it all comes back to ourselves. Like, other people aren't going to solve our problems for us. They aren't living our lives. Like, they don't understand, you know, the way that our brain works or how we think through things or what we're actually going through emotionally or our own values. Like, it all comes back to that.
Yeah, we all go through our own storm at some point in time, but if you avoid this storm, it's going to keep storming rather than if you go through the storm, eventually you're going to reach sunshine. So,
I love that so much. Well, this has been such an awesome conversation. I absolutely loved it, and I love getting to know you too. So, where can we find you? Where can we find the book? All of the things.
yes, you can head over to janandjillian.com, and that's where you can find us to learn more about services, or you can even check out our book in terms of the links on our website as well.
Perfect. Any social medias we should check out or anything?
Oh yeah, you can follow us at janandjillian.com or gosh, at janandjillian on Instagram. And you'll find stuff. Actually, today I just posted on professional boundaries. So
Ooh, love that.
yeah.
The free tips. We love the free tips.
Yes, we post there pretty much daily. So, yes.
Awesome. Well, thank you, ladies, so much. This has been so great.
Yes, thanks for
Thanks for
having
having
us.
Hey guys, thanks for coming to this week's episode of The Confident Mompreneur. If you loved today's episode, let us know, share to your stories and tag us, send to your friends, give us a rating, all of the things, and make sure to check out our guests and follow them on all of the links that we listed above. If you're looking for me, you can always find me at The Confident Mompreneur, and you can also check it out www.theconfidentpost.com for a blog relating to today's episode. I am so happy you're here, and I hope to see you again next week.